power is coming directly from the PCM. I really like the look of it with it kind of wrapping around. The Hemi engine is running like it should. We got the thing dropped. If you have an engine that has the MDS solenoids in there, this is definitely a step you'll want to take. Hey guys, welcome back to another Ask a Tech episode. Now, the very first thing I want to say here is I want to thank you guys so much for your really positive response to this series. We're going to go ahead and carry this thing forward. Now, the second thing I want to say is I apologize. I won't be able to get to all of your questions, but I did pick out the ones that I thought were the most relevant or the ones that I end up getting asked all the time. So without further ado, let's get into the questions. All right, our first question for the day comes from DIY Jones. He says, can you replace the NAG transmission with the 8-speed transmission? Now, this is a NAG right here. This is a 5-speed transmission. He's talking about upgrading to the ZF8 Spd transmission in the newer cars. Now, I'm never one to say that you can't do things. Everything is possible with enough money, but is it feasible or reasonable? No, it is not. The 8-speed transmission is physically longer than the NAG transmission. There's many actual physical components you'd have to change. You have to change over the flex plate on there. You have to change the trans cross member. You have to change the drive shaft. So there's a number of things that you would have to change mechanically. Yes, it would bolt up, but the real issue, as with most things on cars these days, is electronics. How are you actually going to control the transmission? The transmissions are controlled entirely separately. This is the Mercedes-based transmission, and the ZF Trans, they're their own company. They do things their own way. So this Trans, the NAG, has an external TCM or transmission control module that tells it what to do and when to do it. The 8-speed Trans, the TCM is built into the valve body assembly. So how do you get those things to talk to each other and talk with the PCM to know exactly what the engine's doing or when it should do what it's doing? Literally, it's not feasible to make that swap happen. So could you do it? Technically, yes, probably, but the amount of work it would take, it would have to be a complete custom one-off. It would cost many thousands of dollars. There's no realistic way to do it that makes sense, other than just buying a car that already has an 8-speed transmission in it. And also, I would say too, that the NAG Trans is a really good transmission. I don't really see that there would be that much benefit in upgrading to the 8-speed transmission. Yes, the 8-speed is a better transmission, but not so much better that it would even make sense to try to tackle a project of that magnitude. Now, could I see someone doing it in the future just to say they've done it? Of course, that's what cars are all about. You just do stuff like that. But again, I just don't see that as feasible. All right, our next question comes from Yo, this Mike. I like that name too. It says, thinking of buying a 300, I want to spend the extra money on the 5.7, but is there any drawbacks to settling for the 3.6 liter? Other than the obvious cool factor, which I currently enjoy with my 13 Grand Cherokee. I love the Hemi, but they sure are thirsty. Love the series, keep up the great content. Yeah, Mike, to be honest, I actually really like the V6. The Pentastar engine that they have, the 3.6, it's been around since 2011 now. I was working at a dealer right when they very first came out, and it's a good engine. There are some drawbacks to it. You know, rocker assemblies most notoriously tend to fail on those things. You don't want to get like a 2010 a 2011 or a 2012 model because those ones had some cylinder head problems. But after that, they're a pretty solid engine. I mean, you go anything from 14 and up, they're pretty darn good beyond those rocker assemblies. But even that, it's not too big of a deal. They make really good power. I'm pretty sure it's like 315 horse-ish for that Pentastar V6. So even in a Charger Challenger with a 3.6, they still move along really, really well. Now, are there any real drawbacks to it? Well, one is I don't find that they get especially better gas mileage than the Hemi engine does. They do get better, but it's not like a huge amount better. And then also, like you mentioned, it's the cool factor, really. You know, it's really difficult to make a V6 sound good. So if you put an exhaust on one of those engines, they just kind of sound blatty. I really don't think they sound aggressive or good in any way. And then your aftermarket options are very, very limited because although they do make parts for the 3.6 Pentastar, it's gonna be a lot less than they make for the Hemi, obviously. So, but you can still do all the same cosmetic things that you would to a Hemi-powered vehicle. You can still make them look absolutely fantastic. And is it worth the extra money to go to the Hemi? I do think it is. Just because like that's what you're buying, right? You're buying a Challenger Charger, you kind of want that real muscle car thing. But are there any drawbacks to going with the V6? Not really. I think it's a great engine. I think it's a good setup. Next question comes from Mike Trio. He says, hey, rebuilding a 6.1 block was scratched deep. I got a donor block, same 6.1. Should I still get it to the machine shop if I'm putting stock internals in it? Great stuff, man. That is actually a good question. So if you're just putting stock components back in it and the cylinder walls themselves don't look like they have any scratches or anything like that, I would say very easily you can just do a quick hone job yourself. You don't necessarily have to take it to a machine shop. Take a ball hone or a 3-stone hone like I like to use and just run it through the cylinder walls, clean them up a little bit, get that glazing off of there, and then I would absolutely recommend to put new piston rings on those pistons when you put them in. That way they kind of bed in together with those cleaned up cylinder walls. I think that's perfectly fine. I don't see an issue with that. In fact, you'll see me do that on the Cheap Hemi Challenge here very shortly in the next episode or two on our Ram 1500. That's basically the process I chose. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as the cylinder walls are in good condition, it'll work just fine. All right, Jamie D asks, question, can my junkyard 06 5.7 LX engine run with any early Ram ECM without being flashed or reprogrammed? Now, I'm assuming you're saying you have a junkyard 06 LX engine and you're putting it into an early Ram truck. If that is the case, yes, that should work just fine. Now, if you're talking just the block itself, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem at all. The crank trigger will read the same on those engines, so it should work with no issue. Now, you don't want to use the intake manifold from the LX or anything like that because your sensors are going to be in different positions, so you'd have to change around the wiring harness a little bit to make that work. But if you're talking just the block itself, just slap it in there and put all your original manifold on there from the early Ram, yeah, it'll work. All right, Jeremy says, I've got a 2013 Ram 2500 5.7 that I need to open up to see if I have a cam failure. I would like to be able to find out if the engine was contaminated with cam filings and wondering what's the best way to do that. There was nothing in the oil filter when I cut it open and had to look inside it. The engine is sluggish on takeoff and gets horrible gas mileage. Also, I was under the impression that the cam and crank bolts are torque to yield, and I was also wondering if the threads on the head bolts are oiled before installing and torquing. Awesome videos, I'm so glad I found this channel. Me too, Jeremy. Okay, so as far as finding out if the engine is contaminated with those filings from the camshaft, the best way to do that is to remove the intake manifold, and right behind the timing cover in the engine valley, there's a solenoid bolted in place there. That's your VVT solenoid. Unbolt that, there's just one 10mm bolt, slide it out, and there's a metal screen on that solenoid, and see if there's a bunch of metal debris packed up on that screen. That'll tell you if you're having a lot of cam filing issues or if there's a lot of metal debris in the engine. Now, you're talking about the engine is sluggish on takeoff and gets horrible gas mileage. That doesn't really sound like lifter failure to me. Generally, when you have lifter failure, you're going to hear that ticking or knocking noise, and it's also accompanied by a misfire issue. That's generally what you're going to find. It doesn't really make a huge effect on overall performance or mileage, generally. It may be like a tiny bit, but I don't think you'd really notice it that much, unless it was happening on multiple cam lobes at the same time. As far as the cam and crank bolts, no, they are not actually torque to yield. You can use those over again if you actually do that repair. And also, the threads on the head bolts do not need to be oiled before you torque them down. They go in dry. And that's another thing too, is make sure that actually that the bolts that the head bolts, or sorry, that the threads that the head bolts go down into, make sure that those are very clear of any sort of obstructions in there, whether it be oil or coolant or any sort of debris that gets down in there. I want to break up the video right here and ask you guys a question instead. How are we going to get the younger generation interested in cars? Now, I know there's a lot of doom and gloom out there about the younger generation and how to get them involved. It's a tricky challenge, right? Things are different now than they were when we were younger. But the thing is, I'm so passionate about what I do, and I feel like there's a lot of younger kids who would also be passionate about the same thing. So the question is, how do we get them fired up? How do we get them involved? Now, for me personally, I think a lot of that has to do with YouTube. You know, so many of their role models, you would say, are on YouTube. They're watching them. I'm talking about guys like Adam LZ, Cletus McFarlane, and my personal favorite, Taylor Ray. Now, whether you agree with their personalities or the way they do their videos or whatever, I don't think that's really important. What's important is that they're showcasing cars to the younger generation and they're getting kids involved that ordinarily wouldn't have been involved. And I think that's the key behind it all. So I want to hear from you guys. Put it down in the comments below. How do you think we can get kids more interested in the automotive field? All right, Andrew Bell says, on the MDS lifters, are the release push pins supposed to line back up with the holes every time they open and close? Because mine are not. The inner cylinder is turning. Yes, that is extraordinarily common. Every single MDS lifter I've ever pulled out is not perfectly centered in those holes. And ironically enough, even when they're brand spanking new from the factory, a lot of times those pins are not lined up perfectly with the holes. From taking them apart in the past, it's my impression that when those pins get depressed, that inner cylinder does rotate and is allowed to spin. And as soon as the oil pressure is taken away and those pins are supposed to pop back out again, I think the cylinder will continue to spin until one of those pins lodges itself in that hole. So therefore, they're not going to line up perfectly every time. Doesn't mean they're not working properly. Basically, every single one I've seen is like that. They're still working. It's just, it does look weird that the pins are not lined up perfectly with those holes. So Bottom Line Outdoors says, I have a 2008 Ram 1500 5.7. Can I replace the motor with a newer 5.7 from a 2014 Ram 1500, or do I have to buy a 2008 motor? You have to stick with a motor that's pre-2009. Anything before 2009 will probably work out for you. Anything after 2009, that's when they added VVT, and it's going to be different. And the primary reason that it's going to be different is because the crank trigger is different. They changed that on the newer ones. So if you put one of those newer engines in your old truck, it wouldn't actually read the crank position properly, and it would never fire. It would never run. So as long as you're buying something pre-2009, you're in good shape. DA Visual says, I've got a 2005 Jeep Grand Cherokee Limited 5.7 Hemi, and I want to work on it as a project car, but I'm not sure if the same rules to working on it apply as the Challengers, Chargers, etc. Ever work on one of those before, and are they worth fixing to be a daily driver? 100% they are. I actually like those Grand Cherokees a lot. And yes, the same exact rules apply. The engine itself is mechanically almost identical to, I mean, the block and the heads and all that, they are identical to Challengers and Chargers. There's just differences with exhaust manifolds, intake manifolds, all that kind of stuff. So yes, all the same stuff applies to those engines. Now, are they worth fixing to be a daily driver? I love those things. I think they work really well. I like having the power of the Hemi in those Jeeps because they are a little bit heavier. And I think the 3.7 and 4.7 aren't quite enough for those things. So when you get the Hemi in there, man, they finally drive like they're supposed to. Now, a couple of the drawbacks to those early Grand Cherokees like that are the front differential bushings tear on 95% of those. So if you jump in one of those cars and you put it in drive and it goes clunk, and you put it in reverse and goes clunk, I can almost guarantee you that those front differential bushings are torn. Now there's multiple ones, I think there's 3 of them on there, and very often 2 or 3 of those actually tear. So the very first thing you want to do with one of those is pull that front differential out, as long as you have a 4-wheel drive version, pull that front differential out and replace those bushings, and then that clunking noise will go away and makes them so much nicer to drive. But other than that, they're a pretty solid vehicle overall. I like the way they look. I think they can be pretty cool actually, if you actually fix them up a little bit and do a few things to them. But yeah, I think that's a great vehicle. So our very last question for this video comes from I See You Hatin' 23. Another nice name. It says Chrysler, FCA, Stellantis, whatever you want to call it, they get a lot of criticism from people about their bad reliability. As a tech's point of view, how true is it that Chrysler has junk or are extremely unreliable? I'm sure you hear it a lot too. That's all I heard in the 17 years I had my 04 Ram, mostly from people who have never owned one. Just hearsay. He says, by the way, my truck got totaled. I don't have it anymore. Otherwise, I'd still be driving it. Yes, you know, I wanted to address this question specifically because I absolutely feel like that's the case. There's a lot of noise out there about Chrysler being junk or unreliable, but here's something I want you guys to understand. For every single person who says Chryslers are junk, there's a person who says Fords are junk, and there's a person who says Chevys are junk. There's so much. I heard this from my cousin, my uncle, my brother, my dad, and they just regurgitate it and feed it out to somebody else. And it's all just a lot of noise. Guys, every single professional technician knows that all cars have problems. They all break. Otherwise, we wouldn't have jobs, right? That's how it works. And if Chrysler were so much worse than all the others, then our service departments would never be able to keep on top of all the problems that are out there. The simple truth is, all cars have problems, they all break, and they're all of a very similar quality level. If one was significantly below the rest, they would very quickly go out of business. And another thing I really want to point out to you guys that I'm sure a lot of you don't know is that the manufacturers realized quite some time ago that when they were buying parts from their suppliers, it made more sense for them to buy in bulk and go in together on these suppliers. That way, it's a little bit cheaper for them. So you think you're buying a Dodge or a Chevy or a Ford? Well, many of those components that are in that vehicle were bought from a third-party supplier that all 3 of them bought from. So they're the same exact part in all of these different cars. So there's not this gigantic difference that a lot of you think that there is. They're all very, very similar. Now, that is what I want to say about the reliability side. However, these companies are run by actual people, right? Now, I do think there are big differences in the way that companies are run. Now, I'm gonna go into a little bit of story time here. Back in 2008, I was working for the Dodge dealer and Chrysler went bankrupt. And we were all trying to figure out what was gonna happen, what were we gonna do. You know, a lot of really cool cars that were coming down the pipeline got axed at that point because they just went bankrupt. Well, they got purchased by Fiat. And my very first response was, huh? Fiat? And then after I realized how big of a company Fiat really is and how deep of pockets they had, I was like, man, this is really good news, because now they can actually sink some money into some things, really try to straighten some stuff out. And then it came a bunch of policy decisions down the line to like really start tightening the belt and save every penny that they could. And I kind of got it because it was during the financial crash, and it was like, okay, well, let's just get through this tough stretch. And then once we get out the other side, we can really start putting some money back into this company and make it really strong. But that never happened. Ever since that time in 2008, every single decision that has come down the line has basically been about cost cutting and saving money and saving money and saving money. Even after they were making a bunch of money, after the economy started getting really good again, didn't matter. They just kept tightening their belt, tightening their belt, tightening their belt. And it didn't make any sense to me, you know? It just, like, what are you doing? Like, you gotta put some money back into this company to make it work again. But it was constantly, you know, to me, all of their policy decisions basically amounted to stepping over dollars to pick up dimes. That's what it looked like to me. And as a technician, on the technician side of things, I don't know if you guys know, but we are very, very regulated in what we can and cannot do. And the decisions that we make are decided by the manufacturer, not necessarily by the dealership that we work for. So it can be very difficult to perform our processes correctly and actually then get paid for those processes. If they decide that you've done something incorrectly, you don't get paid. That's how it comes down. So it's a really difficult line to walk. And for me, I was trained by Chrysler 100%. So when I'm sitting here saying, okay, this is how you trained me to do this, this is how you trained me to diagnose this, and now you're saying, no, you can't do it that way anymore because it might cost us a few bucks. It doesn't make any sense to me, and that was a huge part of my decision to walk away and start doing my own thing. And now, guys, I couldn't be happier that I have done that, because I can reach such a broader audience this way, and I feel like I can help so many more people. I loved what I did at the dealer because I felt like I made a tangible difference, right? Your car is broken. I helped you fix it. Now you're back on the road, especially if you were on vacation or something like that. I love doing that. I love fixing the car and getting you back out there on the road. It was a really nice personal satisfaction thing. A lot of you guys experience that with your own jobs. But for this now, I feel like I can reach so many more people who are having trouble and try to help them out and get them back on the road, or even just give them the confidence to try to tackle something on their own. And that way they can skip the whole process altogether. So I really enjoy what I'm doing now. But anyway, to circle back to the original concern, no, I do not think that there's a huge reliability issue with Chrysler. However, I do think that some of their policy decision making really does not make sense. That being said, I've never worked for any of the other manufacturers. I worked for Chevy a long time ago along with Dodge, but I haven't worked for any of the other manufacturers, so I don't know what their policy decisions have been like since that point. Maybe they're right in line with them, I don't know. But it just doesn't make sense, because as technicians, our focus is to try to fix your car. Like, that's our only role in life, right? Is to fix your car. And when they make it almost impossible to do our jobs, it just doesn't make sense anymore. So that is probably my gripe with Chrysler in general. It has nothing to do with reliability. My apologies, went off on a little bit of a rant there, but to bring it back down here, I just want to thank you guys so much for always watching, always supporting. Make sure you're putting more of those questions down in the comments below. I will try to answer them if I can, and we'll see you next time on Reignited.